Hello class, welcome back. So if you've been following the class Twitter, you probably know that my keyboard broke down and just for less than 24 hours. And it actually got really boring. I couldn't do anything and I even had to go outside, can you imagine? So okay, I'm just happy that I can type again and get some work done. All right, so we left off in the last video here. So we have our homepage now, we can reach it after logging in. And when we do log in, we set the token in the local storage so that we can fetch the user from it. But we're not doing anything with the token and we're not fetching any data. So let's actually start to work on it. Before we fetch any data from the server in the homepage, I want to first establish an authentication context. So if you're not familiar with context, I'll post a link in the description for this article. It's a really cool article that shows you how to use context in a really efficient way. And doesn't explain that much about context. I assume if you click on this one, if you click on this one here, application state management or React, this one goes like deeper in explaining what is state management. And if you're familiar with context, then you can just code along. So let's start to actually do this. So I'm going to go to VS Code. And here in the source folder, I'm going to create a new file under the directory context. So I'll say context/auth.js. And here we need to import a couple of things from React. So import React itself. What is that? And let's destructure. So we got create context and use reducer. Reducer. And also we need use context. So from React. First we need to create the reducer. So let's say const, we'll call it auth reducer. And this will take, as any other reducer, a state and an action. And it will have a switch that depends on the type of the action. So let's say switch action.type. And any switch takes a couple of cases. Here we'll have only two cases. So case, first one will be the login case. So let's do login all in uppercase like this. And here when we get a login action, we receive a payload which contains the user data, and we just need to set it to the state, and that's it. Yeah, return the state. So we'll say return an object, and we spread the existing state. Now I'm spreading the existing state, even though this state will only hold a user object, but this is a scalable way so that in the future, if you want to add something else, you have this already written there. So it's just a good practice. So here, let's say user, and we simply assign the action.payload to the user. And that's it for this case. The second one will be the logout. So logout. And this simply just clears the state basically. So we'll say return, we spread the existing state. It doesn't clear the state, but it just sets the user to null. So we'll say user equals null, like that. And of course, we need to have a default case for any switch. And here I'm going to do this cool trick that I learned from this article, which is just throw an error. So we'll say throw new error. And this will say, actually, let's do backticks. And this will say unknown action type colon and pass that action type. So action.type like that. And save so that it formats. And now we need to create the provider that will actually export and use in the app.js. So here we'll say const, actually I'm going to export it straight away. So export default const, const. And here we'll say auth provider equals, and this will take, we'll take some props like any component, and we'll straight away take the children property from it, because we're going to pass it like, the actual markup, the components that hold the app. So we need to put them inside of this provider. So we'll take the children and let's open a code block. And here we need to return. Actually, I need to create the context first. So let's go back up here. I'm going to create two contexts. One that holds the state and one that holds the dispatch. I really like this methodology that I got from this article. Instead of just creating one and destructuring both from it, you create two and you create like a hook. I'll show you. So first one will be the auth state. So I'll say auth state context. and this will be create just a context. So let's say create context, and I'll just duplicate this and call this actually, what is it? Auth, yeah, auth dispatch context. So this will hold the dispatch function, and it will be as well just a regular context. And here we're going to use the reducer. So we'll say const, and we're going to get the state and the dispatch, and this will be equals use reducer, and we'll pass it our auth reducer that we just created. And actually we need to pass it an initial state. So the initial state will be an object with a user that is null, because we could just not pass it an initial state, but if we have any component where we check for the user and it's undefined, it's gonna cause some errors. So we can just initialize a null user. So here we're gonna return both the contexts wrapping each other. The first will be the dispatch. So auth dispatch context. Actually, what am I doing? I close that. Say dot provider. I need to get the provider, and actually I need to pass it a value. So the value, of course, this is the dispatch. This needs to have the dispatch as a value, and then we're gonna have the state. So we'll say auth state context dot provider, and this will have the value which is gonna be the state. So close that, and here we'll just throw the children inside, so that we'll have whatever our app holds. And here we're, instead of just exporting the context like this and then having to use context inside of every component, we can use context here and just export whatever that is held inside that context. So here we can export. Actually made a mistake here. This shouldn't be the default, because we're going to have multiple exports here. So here we'll say export const auth provider, and here we'll export const, and this will create hooks for our context. So let's say use auth state, and this will be a function that calls use context on our auth state context. Yeah, like this, and then repeat this one more time, and this will be use auth dispatch, and this will use the context auth dispatch context. So auth dispatch context, like that. All right, so save that, and let's go to our app.js. So app.js, or actually not app.css, app.js. Here we need to import that provider, the auth provider. So let's say import auth provider from so the same level /context/auth, and actually it's not the default, so we need to destructure it like this, do curly braces around it, and here we just simply wrap everything inside of it. So we'll say auth provider, and then take this closing tag and put it here underneath the router. So let's save. Now, of course, we have the context, but we're not setting the user inside the context. And that will come from whenever we perform an authentication action. So let's start with actually, no, nothing happens in the register. Let's start with the login. So here, when we call the login query and we set the token, we can actually call that dispatch and send the user data already. So let's import that. So here, I'll import, so remember we need to import the dispatch hook. So this one right here, use auth dispatch. So let's say import use auth dispatch from, and we go back one level into context/auth. And here inside the component, we can say const dispatch equals use auth dispatch, and we call it as a function because it's a hook, and it gives us this dispatch, and we can now use that dispatch whenever we actually successfully log in, which would be inside of the uncompleted. So here, let's call dispatch, and we need to dispatch an action, which is an object that takes a type and a payload. And of course here the type will be login, and the payload will be the data.login, which is the result that we get from the login query. And for setting the token, we can actually do it from inside of the context. So let's cut this line, And let's go to the auth context. And here, when we get the action of type login, we can set the token here. So we'll say set item token, and this will be actually from the payload. So we'll say action.payload.token like this. And this should actually work the same way. So let's save and let's test if this context is working. So make sure that your server is running and your client is running, and both mine are running. So I'll close this. Let's go to Chrome. Open the DevTools. I'll actually delete the token, and actually I'm going to go to the login page. So let's go to /login, and actually let's look at the context first. By the way, again, make sure that you have the React DevTools installed as a Chrome extension. So here we see we have two contexts. So the top one will have the dispatch, and the bottom one would have the actual state, which right now is, what is this? Auth Provider client. Why do we have a client here? Oh, actually, no, that's the Apollo, my bad. That's the Apollo provider. So our Auth Provider is right here, and the internal one is the actual one that holds the state, which has a user of null. So now if we log in, it should set the user here to the data that we get back, and it should actually set the token in the storage. So let's log in. I'm going to log in as John 1 through 6 and log in. And there we go. So we get our user set inside of our state, including the token. And if we go to application storage, there we go. We get our token, and it's actually in the storage. And we can't test the login, the logout right now because we don't have any action that performs that. So what I'm gonna do, what do I do? Actually, let's create a navbar and put those links here so that we can easily go to those pages without having to type it in the URL. So I'll close this. And in the home page, so home.js, here I'm gonna put a navbar at the top. So actually, instead of this div, I'm gonna put a row. Let's import that from React Bootstrap. And while we're here, I'm gonna import column as well. So row and column, and I'm gonna need buttons. So say button from React Bootstrap. And here for this row, I'm gonna have three buttons. It's gonna be like a fake navbar. It's not gonna be an actual navbar. So the first one, actually we're gonna need the React router link. So let's say import link from React router DOM. And here this will be a link. So a link, and this will be the login. So let's say to/login, and inside of here we'll have it will say login. Actually, here this needs to be a button. So let's open a button, and I'll give this a variant of link that it looks like a link. And inside of here, it will simply say, actually, I'm going to put it in line like this, and it will say, oh, I almost typed link login. So I'm going to select this and duplicate it 2 more times. And this will be register. So register. This will be uppercase register. And this will be the logout. So actually, this will not be a link because there's no route for the logout. So I'm going to remove this link component. And I'm going to give this button an onClick function or event. So we'll say onClick, and I'm going to give it a logout function, which we're yet to create. So let's create it. So const logout, let's be a function. And this logout needs to use the dispatch and call the logout action from the on the context. So let's import the dispatch. So import. Actually not dispatch, use the hook that gives us the dispatch. So use auth dispatch from go back 1 level to context /auth. And here at the top, let's say const dispatch, I always misspell dispatch, equals use auth dispatch like this. And here when we log out, let's just dispatch an action of type logout. And of course the logout action doesn't take a payload, it just clears the data, the user data. And of course when we log out, let's redirect the user to the login page. So we'll say history. Actually we need to get history from the props. So let's destructure history, and we'll say history.push slash login. And that should be fine, except actually here it needs to say logout. Ooh, logout. So many typos. I stopped typing for less than 24 hours. Now I'm making so many typos. All right, so that looks fine. Everything here should work the same. I mean, not the same, should work. All right, let's look at it. Actually, let's give this like a white background so that it stands out, and spread them out. So here in the row, I'm gonna give it a class name of, let's give it BG white. And also row is by default display of flex, so I'm gonna give it the class of justify content around, so they take up all the space there is. And there we go. So we get to the buttons. If I click on login, we go to the login page. There we go. And the same thing goes for register, and the logout should work now. I'm going to open the DevTools to make sure that it's actually working. So if I click logout, it should delete the token, and it should clear the state. Or actually, the state is not being set because the application reloaded. So let's log in again. We're gonna work on that. We're gonna fix that. But for now, let's manually delete the token and log in again. So John 1 through 6. So we get the token, and if we go to our state, we have our user here. So if we click on logout, there we go, it clears the state. And if we go to application, oh, it doesn't actually delete the token. Oh yeah, it's because I actually forgot to add that line. All right, so local storage dot remove item, and it will just give it the name of the item, and it will remove it. And I'm not gonna test it because I'm sure it works. If you want, you can test it. I don't want to make the video too long just testing stuff. All right, so what's next? Oh, actually, we need to set the user once we get into the app. So even though we have the token right now, if we completely refresh the app, our state doesn't set. Our state, we have like a user null. So let's fix that. And to do that, simply here inside of the auth context, we can get to the token from the storage and set the user. All right, let's say const token. And of course, we're going to get it from local storage. So local storage dot get item. And we called it token, so we get token. And here, let's check if it actually exists, because it could it could be non-existent. So let's say if token. Actually, we need to decode the token. So let's install this dependency. So let's open the terminal. I'm going to open a new tab, and let's do npm, or actually make sure that you're in the client directory. And here do npm install, and we need jwt-decode, which does exactly that. It decodes JWT tokens. I'll let that install and import it. And remember, whenever we actually create the token, there is a part in the middle that holds that data that we encoded, and it's publicly available. You can actually go to this website, JWT. I think that, yeah, this one, jwt.io, and you can learn about what JWT tokens are. And you have this part in the middle that actually holds the data. And it's actually publicly available. Anyone can decode it. This last part is what tells your server that this was created by you, but this one in the middle, you can get the data on the client side. So here we'll import JWT decode from that package that we just installed, JWT decode. So if we do have a token, let's say, let's decode it. So we'll say const decoded token equals JWT decode, and we'll pass it the token that we have. Yeah, we'll pass it like this. I was thinking, does it have bearer, but it doesn't, so that's fine. And now what we need to do is inside the token, we have this exp. Oh, this one doesn't have it, but ours does have an exp value, which has the date that the token is going to expire at. So we need to check if this token is expired. If it is expired, we need to log out the user because this session is expired. Well, it's not technically a session, but you know what I mean. So here we'll say const expires at equals, and we need to get, so we'll say new date and we'll pass it the decoded token.exp, and we need to multiply it by 1,000 because it's actually in seconds, and we need here it needs to be in milliseconds. And let's just console log and see this expires at. So expires at like this. And if there's no token for now, let's just console log and say no token found. All right, let's save. Let's head back to our app. Let's go to the console, refresh. There we go. So we get our token here is expires at 4:48 GMT, and here it's 3:55. So it still has an hour to go because we just logged in like literally 5 minutes ago. If we were to have logged in like, I don't know, yesterday, and then we just open the app, it should actually make it invalid, and just not make it invalid, just delete the token and log the user out. So what we need to do now is we need to check this date against the current time right now. So we'll say if new date, which represents the time right now, is bigger than expires at, that means now the token has been expired. So we can simply just delete it from the local storage. So local storage dot remove item, which is equivalent to logging the user out, and we just remove the item token. Else we need to set it to the state. So what I'm gonna do is so right now we're setting the user to null at the beginning. So we need to set it to this. So let's say user like this. Just I don't know where those texts are coming from. So user like this, and I'm gonna declare a user here. So let user, and of course this is null by default. And now if the token is not expired, we're gonna set the user to decoded token. Now of course, because in our if we go to our resolvers, so go to the server side and resolvers users, the token doesn't have all that data that we get from logging in, for example, but that's more than enough right now. So if we go here, you see that we just put the username inside of that token. So this is only what we're gonna get. If you want to get all the user data, you can write another endpoint and call it like current user or something, and just pass it that UUID and the token and just fetch the user data. But I'm fine with just setting a UUID. That means we're logged in anyway. So I'll say user equals decoded token, and that should do the trick actually. So I'm gonna remove this console log and save. And now if that token is if the token exists and it's not expired, it's gonna set this user to the decoded token value, and it's gonna here when it initializes the state, it's gonna set it to that user. So we're gonna have a user. So if I refresh now and I go to the state, there should be a user. So let's go to components, and there we go. So we get a user, and there's the exp and the issue time, and we get the username John. Nice. One thing though, if we're actually logged in, we need to be able, if we go to the login page, it shouldn't let us go to the login page because we're actually logged in. And same thing as that if we're logged out, if we're like not logged in, we shouldn't be able to go to this homepage because this will have actually like sensitive data, like messages of the user. So we can use the router to redirect. So what we need to do is here in the app.js, instead of just using these regular routes, I'm going to create a custom component. So let's go here in the source directory. Let's create a new file. I'm going to put it inside of the directory called util. And let's call it, I'll call it dynamic route.js. And what this will do, it will simply, okay, let's import React, and we need to use context to know that whether we're logged in or not. Or actually not use context, we don't need to use context because we already have the hook that gives us the state. So let's just import React. Import React from React, and we need to import our state hook. So use auth state from, we go back one level and go into context/auth. And here, let's export default function dynamic route, and this will take some props. Actually, I've been using arrow function. Have I been? Okay, here I'm not. Only in the context I used arrow function syntax. I'm gonna leave it like this. And by the way, this name doesn't matter here because it's the default, but we're just gonna call it dynamic route. Why not? So here, what we need to do, we need to get our user from the context. So let's say const user equals use auth state. And now we need to check if we have a user. So actually, not just that we have a user. Here in our routes, it's different for each route, whether the implication, if we have a user, what we need to do. For example, in the home page, we can't access this unless we have a user. But here it's the opposite. If we do have a user, we can't access this. So for the same component to do both these features, we need to pass certain props that tell this dynamic route what is the behavior that we want to achieve. So I'm gonna straight away here import that dynamic route. So I'll say import dynamic route, even though I haven't finished writing it yet, from /util/dynamic route, and let's copy that, change all these three routes into dynamic routes, which means we don't need the route now from React Router DOM, we're just using it from here. So here, what we need to tell dynamic route is that, for example, the user needs to be authenticated to access it. So let's pass it a prop called authenticated. And if we leave it like this, it just passes a prop authenticated. It just means that this exists. But for these, the user needs to be not authenticated to access them, or aka a guest user, or anonymous, but I prefer the guest because anonymous sounds like some hacking stuff. All right, let's save this. Now, inside of our dynamic route, we need to access that authenticated or guest property, and based on those, render a specific route. So here I'll say if props.authenticated, if that exists, and we have a user, then we need to let the user access this route. So we simply, or actually no, let's do if props.authenticated and no user, then that means this is a like, for example, in our case, this is the home route and we don't have a user. That means we shouldn't allow the user to access the home route. We should redirect them to the login. So we will return we'll actually use redirect. Actually, let's import those now. So import, we need the regular route from React Router DOM, and we also need redirect from React Router DOM. And here we'll return redirect, and this will redirect to the login page. So to/login, like this. Else, if props.guest, so if this is a guest route and we do have a user, then we also need to redirect. So let's just copy this line. But in this case, we redirect to the home page because this means the user is logged in, but they're trying to access either the logout, not the logout, the login or the register page. So we just need to redirect them back to the home page. Else, we just pass this route as it is. I mean, we create this route as it is given to us from the regular props of this route. So we'll say route, and now we need to give it a component because this is just a regular route. And this will come from the props. So we'll say props.component, and we spread the rest of the props. So let's close that. And why is it like this? Else. Oh yeah, return. Else return. Actually, I mean, did do curly braces because for the sake of consistency. All right, so this should work. And make sure everything is saved and the server is running without any errors. Cool. I'll close this. Close that. Let's go back here. So now we actually have, oh, we don't have a user. Let's reload. User is undefined. Do we have a token? Oh no, that's fine. Okay. Why is it undefined actually? Oh yeah, because at the top the user is undefined. So I'll just set it to null at the beginning. All right, even though there isn't actually a difference, but I prefer null. All right, so the user is null because we don't have any token at all. So that means we can access the register and the login, but we shouldn't be able to access the homepage. And there we go, we get redirected to the login. So now if we do login, 1 through 6, we get to the homepage, and if we try to go to login or register, it actually doesn't work. Even if you do type it, it doesn't work. It redirects us to the homepage because we do have a user. And if we log out, of course, now again, same behavior works as intended. All right, so now that we have our login context and kind of like the route guards set up, we can actually start to fetch the users from the database and show them. So actually, I'm going to log back in. So John 1 through 6. I'm going to close the DevTools. And now we need to consume a query, so which is going to be the get users. So we need to get the users, we need to get their username, and we also need to get, actually for now, just their username, unauthenticated. That's fine. All right, let's actually do that on the client. So I'll go back to VS Code, and actually let me close everything because I don't like to open too many tabs. Let's go to the home page, and here we need to execute that query. So let's get both GQL, so import GQL, and use query this time, because as soon as we get to this page, it's going to execute the query because it knows what it's fetching. So it's going to be from Apollo client, and let's write that query. So const, this will be get underscore users equals GQL open template strings, and here we'll have query get users. It simply just calls get users, and let's get their username, email, what is it, created at, and should be it for now. It should be fine. Let's actually call that query. So here, let's say const, and from say equals use query, and let's pass that get users query. And we can get all loading and data, and also error if there's an error. And let's actually just check the results, because there will be something interesting now. So if let's say if error, console log the error, error like this, and let's duplicate this and do the same for data. So Control D here and say data. Let's save. And now here, let's open the DevTools. Go to the console, and there we go. We get unauthenticated. Now we are logged in, and in our state we have our user and we have our token, but we need to actually pass this token, because if you go to network, actually let me refresh, and you go here, you see it says unauthenticated because we're not passing that as a request header. Remember here in our playground we were adding it as an authorization request header. So let's actually do that. To do that, you can let's Google Apollo client authentication, and actually we're not using cookies, we're using tokens, so we need to set a header. So here I'm gonna let's copy from the import set context down to here. Don't get the client because we already have our client, so copy that. Let's go to VS Code. So we need to go to our Apollo provider, and here let's paste that. So what we need to change is here the URI. Let's get our URI, so copy that and then paste that here. And what this set context does basically is on each operation, on each GraphQL operation that we execute, it takes that operation, it takes the headers, kind of like an interceptor in between, and sets a header if you wanted to do that. So each time a token changes and then you operate a new operation, it actually sets that new token. And if you log out, it does set that token, and of course it will be empty, and that's fine. You just send it as an empty token, and if the route or operation is public, it's successful, otherwise it's not. So here, so we get this HTTP link, and we get this auth link, which creates a simple auth link with these headers, with the authorization header with our token, but we need to concatenate them here. I believe they have that here. Yeah, so let's just copy this. And here we pass the, actually not the URI, link. And this will be auth token.concatenate HTTP link, which is here. Let's save, and let's go back to our app. Create HTTP link is not defined. Oh, okay, there's a missing import. So this one, HTTP link from Apollo client, paste it there, save. And now this query is actually successful. So let's look at the response. There we go. We get Jane, and we also get, oh, we have only Jane. So Jane is the only other user. We only have John and Jane. And because we are John, we only get Jane. All right, so let's show those the users. So just to show you a reference, this is what I'm copying literally Messenger. So we need to have this section on the left that has the users. So let's create like a column for it. So in the home page, and I'm gonna create another row here. So let's say row. I'm gonna wrap these in fragments because you can't return two children in the same component. It needs to be one child. So let's import fragment from excuse me, from React. So fragment, and here in the second row, so I'll have the column on the left will be of width 4. So I'll say call xs equals 4, and I'll just duplicate this one more time, and this will be 8. This will be where the messages are. For now, I'll just put a paragraph there that says messages. And here we need to, because now we have our users, we can actually put them here. But I'm gonna put like a markup like variable. So let's say users markup, and here I'll actually create that. So let users markup. Now because this is conditional, I'm gonna do like an if statement here, and we'll have a couple of scenarios. So the first scenario is if we're loading or we don't have any data. So if no data or loading, because we can actually not loading, but we don't have data. So we need to do, if either one is true, then we'll say users markup equals, and we'll simply just put a paragraph, and we'll say loading ... else, actually else if, here we need to check. So if none of these is true, now we need to check if we actually have some users. So let's say if data, actually we need to check if we don't have users, because if we have an empty list of users, we need to show a message that explains that to the user. So let's say if data.getUsers, because this is the name of the query and this is where the data will be once we have a data object, dot length, because remember this is always an array, at least an empty array. So let's say if the length of that array equals 0, then we just actually, let's just copy this, and instead of saying loading, it will say no users have joined yet. That means this user is the only user in this platform. So else if, let's just copy this, else if data.getUsers.length is bigger than 0, then we need to actually loop through them and show like details about these users. And here I'll say simply, I'll just put a div. Actually, we need to loop through them, so I'll just remove this. And here we'll say users markup equals, and we'll say data.getUsers.map. And for each user, for now, I'm just gonna return just a simple div. Because we're inside the map, we need to have a key, and the key will be user.username, because that's always unique. And inside of here, we just have a paragraph that has the username of that user. So user.username. Of course, we only have Jane, so we're just gonna see that. So let's save. Because we have the users markup here, we don't need to change anything. And there we go. Oh, we have actually another user called user. So we get both of them here, but let's make this have like a white background. So here, say class name, bg white, and let's put some space between that navbar and this. So say here, margin bottom 1. Alright, that looks much better. Okay, so obviously we need to style this much more, but this video is getting long, so let's do that in the next one. Please make sure to like the video and subscribe so that the YouTube algorithm does its thing. And thank you for watching, and until the next one. Cheers.